My name is Cobus Bester, well, as you can see on the screen in any case. Uh, the whole country held its breath, I think, this week to see what was going to happen in Senekal. And by now, I think most people even know where Senekal is. I think we were also relieved, and we're going to speak to Annette Steyn, who was on this program last week, and we'll be having a word with her. Just a quick report back on what she saw there, what she experienced, what it was like, because certainly Senekal isn't over yet, but we're hoping that it will be more peaceful in future than it was running up to Friday. Talking to her also is Piet Kroukamp, my colleague in crime here on the Week in Review, and Piet Kroukamp, political analyst at Northwest University. Piet, good afternoon. Nice to see you again. And then, of course, as I said, Annette Steyn, she's the deputy, or rather the shadow Minister of Agriculture for the DA, and sitting, if her signal's a bit blurry, she's sitting on a farm somewhere near Colesberg, or Venterstad, I think they call that area.
Yeah.
And talking to us from there, from the farm. So Annette, thanks for talking to us this afternoon once again. And just first of all, I mean, you went to Senekal. I think anybody driving there this past week would have been a bit tense, a bit worried about what to expect. What was your experience driving into Senekal and seeing what was going on there?
Yeah, Cobus, it was a bit, we were a bit worried about safety, not only for ourselves, but also for people in Senekal, people going there. But I think we were kept informed during the week of all the preparations that was done by the police and the community members, the safety structures in Senekal itself. They were constantly informed of what the plans were, where they were going to have demarcated areas where people can go into. And I think it was also important that areas were demarcated where certain groups could go to, and that was quite widely advertised, not only by the police itself, but also by the groups who did apply to go to Senekal. They kept their members informed beforehand.
I think one can lift one's hat today for all the people who got together, and big organizations. I'm talking about AgriSA, I'm talking TAU SA, Solidarity, all the leaders from various representative groups with a big interest in Senekal and what was going on there. I think one should lift one's hat, first of all, for the way they were able to keep the peace, as it were, and to a large extent, except for one or two littered garbage cans or some stuff that got damaged, it went off very peaceably.
It did. I think also, during the week, a lot of calls went out to people to please stay calm, not to go Senekal. If you get angry very quickly, rather stay at home. So I think everyone played a role to ensure that Friday did not play out as some people might have hoped that it will play out. There was also quite a big police presence, which I think, was part of the problem the previous week. It was very clear that the police were not ready the previous week, were not ready for crowds and did not expect so many people. This week, there were roadblocks outside of Senekal. I am a bit concerned that they didn't search, although it's not in the power really of the police to search police vehicles. But, people could have taken weapons in if they wanted to. But I'm sure if you displayed weapons in Senekal openly, you would have been removed or at least, removed from the area. So in Senekal itself, it was also quite clear that a lot of people were bussed in to Senekal with buses from the EFF. They arrived very early. We saw the first reports of people coming into Senekal around 4:30 in the morning. And then the other groups of people, the grounds where the AfriForum and other groups were outside on a farm or just outside of Senekal. And there was one small area demarcated for farmer groups or other groups that were not part of the EFF. The ANC also had a smallish delegation singing and dancing next to the court area. So definitely, I think all the calls the week before did assist.
Annette, I just want to one thing that from the video footage, it was clear that the EFF marshals at times might have had their hands full, but they were instructed to keep control, and with all due respect, they also did control their crowd relatively well, didn't they? And the other thing is, I just which you can also commentate on, is that apparently there were people who had guns and arms on them, but it was all holstered.
Yeah, Pete, in the area that I work, farmers don't walk around without a weapon. Most farmers have weapons with them. A gun that's holstered. That's the normal working conditions that people do have these days, unfortunately. And in many cases, it saved their lives in the past. So, but it's licensed, and everyone knew that if you do arrive with something, it must be licensed and you must be, wearing it. They didn't openly display it. You had to look to see one or two. I didn't personally see it, but I did saw pictures of that. And then I must say, I walked around in the area of the EFF, not in the mass crowd, but in the area demarcated for them, and they had a lot of marshals standing around. At one stage, they didn't want me to go in there, and I said to them, well, it's a free country. I am going to go across the street. I just wanted to see, the response of that, but they didn't bother me much. They tried, but I'm also sure that when we saw the video clips of the group that went around, I saw a drone footage of a smallish group. I wouldn't think more than 50 or 60 of the EFF members who went outside of the demarcated area to go and stand face to face with the farmers or the people on the other side. I'm not sure if they were all farmers, but the people that came to Senekal itself, and their marshals, as well as the other group's marshals, controlled the crowd very well. So really, I think everyone played a big role to ensure that there is no fighting happening in that area.
What is your view on the behavior of Bheki Cele on the day?
Well, I knew he was coming because we had people monitoring the area the whole time for safety and also to keep ourselves informed. I knew he was on his way, and I actually saw the blue light cavalcade passing me. So when I arrived at the court, because that is what I wanted to go and do, is to go to the court as part of what we are doing to monitor farm murders, as the court watching briefs, to make sure that everything goes well in court, that the police has done their job, and the justice system functions well. And I was quite shocked because by the time I arrived, it was just before 10, and the court venue was already a bit full. So I squeezed into the back, and I was sitting there for about 5 minutes before I realized Bheki Cele and Ayanda Dlodlo, the Minister of
Security.
What is she? State security. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. They were sitting in one bench directly next to Julius Malema. And during the break, they all stood up and started chatting quite friendly and nicely and laughing there. That, to me, was very concerning.
But I spoke to somebody in the ANC, and they said to me that the only real group that the ANC feared that might have caused trouble on the day was the EFF. And that the reason for Bheki Cele, speaking very closely to Julius Malema, was to exactly prevent that. And they talked right from the beginning about it and said, we're not going to do things here today that we will regret, aren't we?
That's fine, Pete, if that was the idea, but to go and sit next to him as if you're supposed to be holding his hand, that was, I think it was a terrible mistake from the minister. They could have been in the same venue. There were so many police officers in any case in the court building. I think there were more police there in the court building protecting maybe the two ministers. So I don't think there was any trouble brewing there. As far as I'm concerned, if I was the Minister of Police and we expected trouble, I would have been outside, not sitting holding the hand of the person that you expect trouble from. And especially when there was a bit of a ruction going on, when some of the EFF members moved out of their space to go and challenge some of the other members, that is the time when the minister was supposed to be outside to keep track of what exactly his police officers outside is doing, because that was another concern. At the time when people moved around the area, the demarcated area, there were no police officers between them. So for the first 15 minutes or so, the two groups had to keep the peace there, and there were no police near them at the time.
Can I ask you one last question on this before we move on? Can I just ask you one last question? I saw footage which indicated that Helen Zille was there. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. She wanted to go with me.
Why she? Why was she there?
It was a personal thing for her. She wanted to go. She feels very strongly about murders, and especially when people get challenged because of a racial issue. And she had a very, very low profile. Both of us, we didn't make any speeches. It wasn't the plan to go and make speeches there. We were there to go and see what's going on, what is the mood, and she was recognized, and she did one or two interviews when she was asked, but for her it was a personal issue.
Well, that's Annette Steyn. I'm going to ask her to stick around if she wants to, Annette, because we were going to talk to your colleague, Jordan Hill-Lewis, but it seems to me that he's not in studio today. There's a bit of a problem with his technology. So in the meantime, if you want to talk along, because I think just to close off the Senekal thing, the one thing that's been a relief to me and very encouraging are the number of farmers in that area who've come out, both white and black farmers who've come out and said, this is not a race issue. This is a crime issue with people attacking farms. So let's not make it something that it isn't. So let's see how it goes from there. The other big event this week, I think, was the president who came out with his, what shall we call it, his plan, his dream, his whole idea of repairing the country in future. And we've got a nice team together who's going to be talking about it. And as I said, Annette is here, and I'm going to put her on the spot as a shadow minister of the DA. And she says she's had the view of the president's speech. And then also Mike Schuessler from economist.co.za. Mike, good afternoon and welcome. And with him, Piet Leroux, who is the CEO of Sake Liga, one of our big business organizations. And of course, Piet Kroukamp still here with us as well.
I see Jordan is on now.
Is Jordan on?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, wonderful. And Annette, we're relieving you, and off you go and enjoy the farm before you get back to work. And Jordan Hill-Lewis, he's the Shadow Minister of Finance for the DA. And I'm very glad that we've been able to get him on this afternoon as well. So, gentlemen, I think, Jordan, let's put you on the spot. First time that we've spoken to you on this program, and looking at this speech of the president, the one question that came up to me, and Piet says this is the gateway to talking about a lot of things, apparently. But is this a pipe dream, or is it reality that the president spelled out there?
Well, firstly, it's great to be with you. It's nice to be on the show for the first time. I think the speech was a bit of both, to be honest, Quibus. There's actually a lot of agreement in South Africa on what economic reforms urgently need to happen to get our economy to recover. And if those reforms, well, those reforms are the only chance really that our economy does have to recover. Otherwise, we are really on a one-track road to a sovereign debt crisis in the next few years. So all of those reforms are theoretically possible. There's no reason why a government with the political will to implement them couldn't do it. The problem is that we've had extremely slow, if any, progress in actually implementing those reforms in recent years because of the policy paralysis at the heart of the ANC. And that's why I say, given the political will, that speech was not a pipe dream. But given the fact that the president is, stuck in the mud politically in his party, I remain skeptical about whether the implementation can actually happen.
Okay, Jordan, just tell me which are the parts that you think that that's not a pipe dream that can actually be done. The institutions are in place, the policies might be ready, legislation might be there. Which areas? I think perhaps we can look at energy. Which areas do you think is actually workable and can be implemented in the short term?
The splitting of Eskom into a generation and a supply distribution company is entirely possible and has been government policy for at least the last 2 years, but very little, no progress has been made on doing that. Allowing for major metro municipalities, the big cities, to buy their own power. Again, that's every energy expert has agreed that could make an immediate massive difference to load shedding and energy problems in the country. And yet only now, probably 36 months later, we've got the first step in that process. The gazetting of those regulations has finally been done. And then allowing for self-generation, also zero progress on that. Private citizens are still very limited in what they are allowed to do. So there's a great example of the president saying one thing many times. In fact, I actually went back and counted the number of times that the president has said that it is government policy to split Eskom. And I counted at least 16 in the last 2 years. And yet the government has made zero progress on that. So that's one example of what I'm speaking about, Piet. I can share others.
Jordan, my question was actually a little bit different. Those areas of concern we all have, but what do you think in the speech is possible to implement now? Which areas of the speech stand out, say, yes, that can be done and will be done, and you have trust in what the president has said there? Are there any areas, positive areas, you think that can be done immediately and you have the expectation that it will be done?
Okay. The expectation that it will be done is an important qualifier. I think that all South Africans have to recognize the progress that has been made in recent weeks on corruption. And corruption is not ordinarily mentioned as an economic reform, but it absolutely critically is an economic reform, because so much of the bad sentiment in our economy stems from this idea that no one is held accountable for corruption in South Africa. And so we absolutely cheer the progress that has been made and the arrests that have been made on corruption. And I think that there does genuinely seem for the first time the intention to take this seriously, and we hope that there will be a lot more progress over the coming weeks and months.
But what do you think, sorry, one last thing. What do you think about the consensus, the NEDLAC consensus that the president has made much about the last few weeks? Is there such a consensus? Are you aware of it? Do you know the contents of that?
Yes, I think that's a good question. For the first time, that's why I said at the beginning, there's actually a lot of agreement on what needs to be done in South Africa. So you've even got an organization like COSATU agreeing at NEDLAC that this public sector wage bill is unsustainable and does need to be reduced. Now, of course, there will still be disagreements on how much it needs to be reduced and how that should be done. But actually, the very agreement is quite significant in South Africa. And that's why I say there is actually overlap and there is some unanimity of what needs to be done. We've just got to get on and start doing it now.
Victor Roux, I think what bothers me about what I saw in the speech, there's a lot of great ideas, but the question that comes up is, where's the private sector in this whole thing? We've just heard Jordan referred to the reduction of the wage bill, but at the same time, the president's talking about creating new jobs, which is granted part-time jobs or short-term jobs in many ways. He's talked about 800,000 jobs, I think, which is in fact fewer jobs than what we've lost during the lockdown. So it worries me that there's been so little reference to the private sector and the role that the private sector should be playing in the recovery process.
Yes, this speech by the president was not out of touch with most of what his party program has been and his government's program has been even before his term. And it centers around the political allocation of capital. So to Mr. Ramaphosa in his speech, and if you look at the plans and his advisors, then key to them is that government is central to economic growth. You can look at all these suggestions, and they're all state-led suggestions. There are some overtures made or some references made to some privatization or splitting of Eskom, etc. All those are good, but those are all side issues. If you distill the essence of his speech, then it was that there will be a massive increase in government spending, because that's the only way you can do what he said with jobs and infrastructure spending, etc. And all of those center around the priorities of government. And not the economic engine of the private sector.
Mike Schuessler, talking about that, I mean, all this money that the government's talking about spending, the president referred to, where's the money going to come from? They don't have money at the moment.
No, South Africa does not have money. We'll borrow more, but you're going to pay for it. The thing is, you know, I think it was better than expected in a way, but I think, you know, in a country, I just thought this weekend again, in a country that's been nearly 25 years of over 20% unemployment, and you're again creating short-term job opportunities in the government, your net investment in the country, that's after you take away the depreciation aspect of capital, is 3.6% of the economy. It's too little, and government is already too big. Our taxes as a percentage of GDP put us in the top 10, and we want to increase that. And the finance minister is cooking food somewhere in Sanin. I would also cook food. I wouldn't want to be finance minister, to put it mildly. So we are in serious trouble. I don't think anybody on the show even has an inkling what's about to happen in the next, say, 5 years. We are in serious trouble. We are one of the lowest investment countries in the world with gross fixed investment. We are probably in the lowest 3 or 4, with the UK being 1 or 2 of them and Brazil below us. In terms of investment, and our government does not invest enough. Our government does not believe in the future. They do not invest in the future. And to hear a speech, which is very nice, but it's a bit wishy-washy, and your finance minister's posting food pictures on Twitter, it doesn't gel. It doesn't make sense. You know, many countries have killed leaders for this, and I'm not kidding. You can go back 300 years ago to the Sun King of Bavaria, and he built a very nice castle. It was very good investment in the country, if you wish. It was just for him, and he didn't make it. And if we take it a step further and we look at South Africa right now, then much of our investment has also been wasted. So the money amounts are maybe big into Eskom, but the efficiency of that investment is also to be questioned. So my problem is that there was no political capital put down. And in that terminology, then your investment capital is not going to follow. Because if you're not prepared to make the hard decisions after something like COVID and a lockdown, and you're not prepared to say, right, we have a serious problem in the paying of salaries, of wage bill for the government sector, and we have to now bring that down drastically. And to use this opportunity and not to have done it is quite seriously mad. And it is, yes, he was nice and he talked about a little bit of freeing up of the airways and freeing up of this and that. But, you know, we're within a few years away from no SABC, never mind SAA going, Denal's going. We're in running a risk of Eskom not being there. That is where we are. And I'm not being unnecessary alarmist. You just have to look at the numbers. And if you borrow 58% of this year's expenditure, it's now going to go up because the taxes aren't coming in. And the expenditure is going more. So you're probably borrowing around 62% of this year's expenditure. This was the moment. This was the one moment you had to say this is a very serious crisis. And if you don't do it, then sorry, you are a coward. You are selling your people to slavery. That's what you're doing. And no modern economy can live without investment, proper, efficient investment. And that's a fact.
Mike, let me just ask you one or two questions. There was one of the things that was mentioned or mooted was the likeliness of the state-owned enterprises being listed. And I think if you use Telkom as an example, it looks like it's quite possible and they could become more efficient. That's the one thing. The other thing is, I think, isn't it a bit of a myth that if you suddenly set free the private sector, it will create these millions of jobs? Even if you do it today, what is the likeliness that the private sector might focus on creating wealth as opposed to creating opportunities and jobs? They will invest in areas where there's a higher return or there's any return at all. And with the new fourth industrial type of economy, it's very likely that labor is not the focus of investment at all, which means you can set the private sector free if you want to. You might even get economic growth, but it's very unlikely that we will do anything about our unemployment rate, isn't it?
Look, unemployment is a very big problem, Pete, and it's not going to change very quickly. But if the private sector is not making money and the net operating surplus in many countries, not just South Africa, and I would give it that, has really declined, and the profits of firms are under severe pressure if they are profits at all. But in South Africa, our profit margin has been declining for many years now. And if I look at the fixed investment in South Africa, the net fixed investment, the private sector supplies double that of the government and the public corporations. I'll get to listings now, but I think we must just realize that the private sector is investing. They are actually taking care of the depreciation still, and they are putting in. And if it wasn't for the private sector, the unemployment rate, the standard unemployment rate would be 40%. If you want to turn this thing around, you're going to have to spend political capital and start telling people profits are good. Simple. Profits are good. And if you don't do that, you are not expending political capital and you're deciding that people shall not get employed. Let's put it this way. If you've got 10.8 million people unemployed, last year, taking before COVID, we had more unemployed people than America, Germany, and Poland combined. If that doesn't scare you, because we don't have the population of either of those, nothing will scare you. So let's get back to what you said about privatization. Nobody's interested in SAA, SA Express. It's all wishy-washy stuff in the sky. Denal, maybe if you do something, but you'd have to give it away. And you'd have to give it away to a savvy investment, and that's very difficult for a government to do. If you look at Safcol, maybe. Eskom, maybe. There's not much left. Telkom was sold 20 years ago when there were still some things left in the bag. But yes, it is a possibility, and it does take away the pressure of government to have to provide capital, because government cannot provide capital efficiently to its own state-owned enterprises, and it's a mess. And I would say you don't need to necessarily privatize everything. What you could do is you could just say the rail stays in government's hands, the port stays in government's hands, but the operations are all privatized and they go ahead and anybody is allowed on rail, which is one of the ideas that they have. I was in a working group just a week ago and everybody's agreed. But now the thing is, the timeline is 2 to 3 years. If that becomes a timeline every time, and then we know it gets extended, then it's a massive problem. I mean, I've been talking to government officials who, in their dear honesty, are telling me how bad it is. Nothing that anybody is saying in the media is as bad as what they're telling me. So I don't know exactly. I think he's trying very hard, but he's not prepared to spend political capital. He's constrained in that sense. And if you do that, then I'm sorry, it's now time. It's more than 2.5 decades after the end of apartheid. We've had virtually 3 decades of very little capital formation in the economy. Capital formation, he himself says, well, investment, it's the other word for it, is the thing that unlocks jobs. And that's the thing that we need. But if people are scared and you're making all the wrong noises, be it in Senegal or be it wherever, then you're not going to get the capital. I'm not going to become a farmer and put my life at risk. I'm not going to become an industrialist and get shouted at. It doesn't work that way.
Okay.
That's life.
Jordan, you seem to have an affectionate relationship, at least a Twitter one, with Tito Mboweni. Do you think he's almost as useless as Mike is describing the president? Because if you just look at the case of SAA, one of the things, the only really thing that the Minister of Finance can do is just to refuse to give the money. And so far, he has largely refused to give the money to set up a new airline. Do you really think that Tito Mboweni is completely out of touch and whatever we will see on the 28th might not really address anything that South Africa's concerns?
Pitt, I know it might sound strange coming from the opposition commenting on my opposite number in government, but actually, no, I don't think that he's totally out of touch. I think he's one of the very few people in our government that get it, that understand how serious the situation we are in. I think he would probably agree with most of Mike's economic analysis about how serious our economic situation is. There's just a big problem. There's a couple of big problems with Tito. Firstly, he is on his own. He does not have the support of his cabinet. And even though he has the support of the president, as Mike says, the president is not prepared to go out to bat for him and really expend any capital. So the support is basically meaningless. So he is fighting these battles on his own, and over time that has worn him down to the point where I think that he is, frankly, if I may speak frankly, burnt out, a little bit hopeless, and a little bit disconnected from his job. And we see that in the fact that he sits on his farm. He doesn't really engage much. From what I hear from Treasury staff members who I speak to regularly, he's almost never at work. They kind of have to contact him. He doesn't contact them. And so I think what's happened is that he has been fighting so long with his own colleagues. He's very close to the point of giving up. And that's that's not good news for the country. But if he is going to stay, I would encourage him to take up the cudgels and fight some meaningful fights to prevent the trajectory that Mike spoke about.
You're the shadow Minister of Finance. Put yourself into Tito's shoes and tell us, what would you do now? If you were Minister of Finance tomorrow, what would you do as quickly as possible to get this thing going?
Well, I would present a budget to the country on the 28th and again next year, February, that gets debt under control. And that means some very, very difficult cuts in expenditure, but it is the only way to start avoiding the scenario of sovereign debt crisis in the coming years. And when your colleagues push back and say, well, you can't cut my department and you can't cut my department and SABC needs saving and SAA needs saving and so on, you've got to draw the line in the sand and say no to all of these requests and push ahead with the budget anyway. And if you're overruled, then I'm afraid you have to reconsider your position in government, because you've got to stand for something and say this is what South Africa needs, this is what's right for the economy. And if you've overruled on that, then there's very little point in banging your head against a concrete wall.
Piet Leroux, what would you do?
I think I think that I would more or less do what I suppose Tito Mboweni would do, and I agree with the analysis that he probably gets a lot of agrees with a lot of the basic points, which that South Africa is heading for a sovereign debt crisis, etc., and we shouldn't bail out SOEs and so on. But that's of very little consequence. I think that we're probably, and I speak from a business perspective, and then you have to analyze strategically what are you going to do over the next 5 or 10 years. How do you position your assets, income streams, your liabilities? What do you plan for? How does your external environment look like? And I think we should look this squarely in the eye and say that it's now more likely than not that we will see a sovereign debt crisis. So we will see a government that promises a lot and doesn't do anything of it, and that slowly implodes. We are on a trajectory where the state loses capacity, the ability to enforce its will. We see this with implosions at municipal level, at SOEs, etc. And there's no sign that any of that's going to turn around. So I think we should prepare for a steady decline, hopefully not too abruptly, and think about how we can make our companies and our communities less exposed to that risk. So that means you should want to get foreign income streams. You want to position your assets in jurisdictions that have, that's not so exposed to, let's say, pension fund type instructions and so on. So if you ask me what I do, then I don't want to place myself in Tito Mboweni's shoes. I place myself in business people's shoes and say, okay, let's plan for a decline in government.
Pete, let me just ask you one thing. Where will it, say, for instance, we set the private sector free? If I understand it correctly, the money is flowing out of South Africa, and there's a contraction of available capital to really invest in the South African economy. Where will this money come from? Is there enough money available in private sector to get the South African economy growing, even if all the regulations are removed and legislation is adjusted to suit the interests of capital? We're
living in an era of extremely and unnaturally low interest rates. It's the era of monetary stimulus, and governments all around the world are printing. This money has to find a home. That's why you see some of these stock markets go so high up, even in this time. But the real thing that moves around is productive assets, capital allocation, real assets, productive assets, and we will see a reallocation of that to South Africa as soon as there is a positive policy reform. And with positive policy reform, we mean get rid of BE, privatize SOEs, or don't even privatize them, but just let there be competition in electricity generation, in airlines, etc. So the money and the resources are all over the world. That's the history of economic expansion, and there's no reason to believe that it won't happen again if South Africa were to become a positive policy environment.
I'm certainly going to tell that to Cyril when I see him again.
Thank you.
Mike Schuessler, you go along with that?
Yeah, I think, it's much more difficult building that confidence than we think, but it's also not that hard. It takes proper action and words. It doesn't take money. It is confidence that you need. And you need to come out on the side of business more regularly, more consistently, and say to people, we want to look after our businesses. I mean, I don't believe in Trump in a sense, but what he's done for America, he's made people realize they want their businesses. If you don't look anywhere else in the world, you will, or you can see it in America, but you can see it in Europe. You can see it everywhere. People are looking at how they can protect and grow their businesses. Governments are doing that. South Africa is fighting with its businesses. So the quicker that it realizes it's got to do it the other way around, the better chance we have. It's not the end of the world right now, but we're getting there very quickly, and COVID has speeded up that crisis. I was never a prescription type of person that's end in 2 years. We're going into a sovereign debt crisis. I always said we had the pension funds. We're now seeing that the attention is on that pension fund. How do we make them invest in things that they may not want to invest in, by the way, but we've got capital, and money flows to where the profits are. And once you've got the profits and the confidence, or you get the confidence, you'll get the profits. And you can rejig the tax, but you have to spend political capital to do that.
Mike, let me just ask you one more last question. It seems like the president and the ANC is hell-bent on infrastructure-led growth. Is it possible for the private sector to invest in infrastructure in South Africa and make money from it at all? Is it possible?
Well, we have examples of private hospitals that have made money over the years. You get charged for water. It's been going up at over 10% a year. So private sector can get invested there, and electricity too. Toll roads are around. I think, obviously they're not going to toll your street per se, but let's say in Johannesburg, because we're on I Love Melville, you want to upgrade, say, Beyers Naudé, you put a toll road in, and you are charged for that. So if there is a way to invest and to do it, it will perhaps be a way forward, and the private sector then takes the risks. Gautrain, the government is taking the risk. That's a strange one. But in many cases, I think we can unlock a lot of capital, but we're going to have to accept that there is a payment, and that payment culture is going to have to be protected. You're going to have to tell people you cannot get electricity for free, because everything that becomes free, somebody else pays for, and eventually they disappear. And that's what's busy happening. People are getting sick and tired of paying. I mean, the amounts outstanding on municipal bills is 158 billion. That's over 3 months outstanding. The amount of money written off over the last I think from 2012, 8 years, is 144 billion. So it's 300 billion that you, as a paying citizen in a municipality, have paid for someone else's non-payment. And that makes it very difficult, because you're going to say, but why am I paying? And it also just pushes out more and more people that don't have the money, and then more and more people can't pay. So when you push up the prices, and then you've got Eskom, they owe 29 billion. You add all of that up, you easily get to 350, 400 billion. You need to change that culture too, and that again is political capital. And once people realize that they need to pay, they will use that resource a lot more respectively, and a lot of other things will happen. So we can turn it around, but it's going to be difficult. It's not easy, and I don't indulge much in politics, but I can tell you now that the current government is not prepared to spend political capital. That's the big problem. That's why it's consensus all the time, and consensus does not lead growth.
Mike, what do you think we're going to do with the 250 million debt that they think, if you can work that away? If Andre de Ruyter says, if I can get rid of 250 billion rand of debt, then I can start managing Eskom. What do you think the government should do with that 250 billion that Eskom can't pay?
So that's a very difficult one, but what you can do is when you split Eskom, you will sell it to the private sector for that debt. So you will sell the generation units and so on, and then what is not covered by that selling, government will stand in for. You would have a regulation, but you would not sell the generation part as one. You would sell it as 3 or 4, so that there's competition also from the other new players. The transmission could be one, but then that has a very clear objective. You would have rules, regulations. They would have to publish the daily, the minute prices or whatever, as they do in Europe these days, of electricity that they buy and what they sell it for. And the distribution side is allowed to sign. But our distribution side is already dominated to a large extent by the large municipalities. And they have got a 72% and more profit operating margin on it, which is huge. If a private sector had that, the Competition Commission is all over you. And they would be jumping on your balls, to put it mildly. And, you'd be marched off to prison because it's excessive. But I understand that they give services back to people in other forms. But the problem is with the people that pay, when you've got that sort of operating margin, it has a big explosion on your budget and your stuff. So that's something that we need to talk about. How are we going to do that? But there are options, and I think we can work out. But it's going to have to be the private sector involvement fully. You can look at other stuff, for example, in the airline industry. Why only 20% foreign capital? Capital is foreign anyway in that business. So do you need South African capital even? If you have Ethiopian Airlines flying local routes, the job, what they're doing is flying people. And that'll be good. And I think there are many other aspects on broadband, telephones, broadcasting, everything like that. I think we've got to really put our heads and open up our minds to this stuff. But we're getting very close to the end of the road. We've kicked the can, because that's political speech. We've kicked the can so far down the road pit that the road is now ended. And this was one of the last chances he had to spend political capital.
The opposition is playing with our balls or our cans then.
So we'll have to call a halt there. I want to thank everybody for taking part. I'm sure this is a discussion we're going to be carrying on with on a regular basis. There are a lot of things that came out today, I think, that one can look at individually. I want to thank Jordan Hill-Lewis, Shadow Minister of Finance, for the DA, for taking part today. And I hope we can drag him onto the program again soon. Also, Mike Schuessler. We've had him on before, and always good for the money, as they say. Mike Schuessler, thank you very much. Also, Piet Leroux from Sakeliga, his first time today. I'm sure not the last. And Piet Krokamp, as usual, thank you. And we'll see you next Sunday at 5 o'clock. And have a very nice week. Bye-bye.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Grumpy Old Homo Show.
Yeah, and we are in Pride Month.
We are in Pride Month, and tonight
celebrating queers.
Queers,
all
queers.
that is queer.
So we're doing a fundraiser on the 29th of October. Kindly hosted by I Love Melville .live, and there's sponsored food and drink.
Entertainment.
We've got the Avalon Quartet. We've got the Mamas.
Lilo's going to perform.
And Robert Whitehead. Fatsy City, I tell you, there was everybody everywhere.